Welcome to First Congregational Church of Langsburg's online service. Thank you for joining us here in this digital online space. My name is Pat, and this is Eugene. We will be your hosts for today.
Today is the fifth Sunday of Epiphany, the season that starts with the wise men following a star and ends with the Transfiguration of Christ. We start a new series that turns our attention toward this Transfiguration event and what it could mean for us today.
As we explore, we have a few poems, prayers, and readings for us along the way. Blessings on our journey.
I'll fret no more for passing wickedness, no more than for the new mown grass that fades, to leave room for the growth and tenderness of fresh green leaves, the cool inviting glades of my new life in you, my heart's desire. The true sun rises now, and soon the shades, the last black shades of night, will back retire and mix no more with good. Then I will sing the song of my redemption in that choir, where I, whom you have made, at last can bring my sun to its beginning and its end. Till then I'll be content with each small thing your love provides, and let the rich contend with one another for their fading wealth. For I have found my God and my true friend. Psalm 37, retold by Malcolm Guite.
We light this candle to remind us
that Christ is the light of the world and was born as a human being to dispel the darkness of our hearts and minds. Again.
We light this candle to remind us
that Christ is God's love revealed perfectly, knowing no boundaries or limits, and calling us the beloved of God. Say bye, everybody.
Bye.
Good morning all, and welcome to the fifth Sunday in Epiphany, the season dedicated to exploring the revelation to the whole world that Jesus is the Son of God and what that might actually mean for us today. Now, the journey we've been on in Luke so far has Jesus being revealed to the Gentile world as the Son of God. That word is used by early Hebrew religious believers to describe anyone who was not Hebrew. Now, typically their faith was not generally open to those outside of their ethnicity, although there were exceptions. Even in their own texts, as we found out last week. This inclusion of the whole world into the promises for the Messiah was a very shocking epiphany, especially for those who were the insiders and used their inside status to maintain control of who was in and who was out. Now, Jesus challenged all of this, and it made everyone so mad that they eventually killed him for it. So we're walking in that general direction through this story, but it's helpful to keep that in mind as we go. Now today we have a fairly well-known passage. This is out of Luke 5, and this is what I call one of those Sunday school passages. And I say that because it involves animals, and somehow it makes it way easier to find its way to a coloring page in a church basement for kids to scribble on if it has animals in it, even if it's weird to do it, like Noah's Ark. How many church nurseries are decorated with Noah's Ark imagery, but they just don't include the floating, bloated corpses of the drowned people? Gross, I know, but it's a part of the story. But since it has animals, it's fair game for kids, like some kind of floating petting zoo or something. I don't know, I'm digressing at this point, sorry about that. We don't have Noah's Ark today, thank God. We have Peter, whose name is still Simon at this point because Jesus likes to rename folks, but we haven't got to that part of the story yet. So just know that this is Peter eventually. And he's a fisherman by trade and has come in from a long night's fishing trip, catching nothing. And Jesus decides to commandeer his boat to use as a pulpit. Then he asks Peter to go back out to work and fish again. And this time he catches a lot of fish, a whole lot of fish. Now I have so many questions about this passage. And I had so many questions about this passage that it actually short-circuited my brain for a whole day thinking about it all. What kind of fishing are we talking about here? What is used in this type of fishing? How much fish can fit into this kind of a boat? How much is that going to be worth? What'd they do with all that fish? And then why did Jesus ask him to leave all the fish that he caught and come follow him? Now, these are some of the questions I found, and I found fun and helpful answers to some of them, and some questions I didn't find any answers to. Oh well. Just remember that your questions about a text are very valuable even if you don't get an answer, because they're the empty buckets that hold the meaning. Without good questions, the text becomes a dead fish. Pun intended, yes. Now today, Jesus uses a phrase that has become very popular among Christian fishers today. Follow me and I'll make you fishers of people, or fishers of men, depending on your translations. How many times have we seen this on a bumper sticker, or a coffee mug, or a t-shirt, or on somebody's bass boat? This seems to have permeated Christian society, but what exactly did it mean to Peter, and what does it mean for us today? This is what we explore today. So we're going to hear this passage read to us, and then we shall explore it a little bit on the other side. See you in a minute.
Luke 5, 1 through 11, Jesus calls his first disciples. One day as Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, the people were crowding around him and listening to the word of God. He saw at the water's edge 2 boats left there by the fishermen, who were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and asked him to put out a little from the shore. Then he sat down and taught the people from the boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch." Simon answered, "Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything, but because you say so, I will let down the nets." When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them. They came and filled both boats so full that they began to sink. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, "Go away from me, Lord, I am a sinful man." For he and all his companions were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken. And so were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, Simon's partners. Then Jesus said to Simon, "Don't be afraid. From now on you will fish for people." So they pulled their boats up on shore, left everything, and followed him.
All right, when I think of fishing and boats, I've got a very recreational view of it, like a hobbyist fishing on the weekends. You know, the more serious the fisherman, the more expensive the gear. Some just pull and bobber fish from the shore or from a dock, and some fly fish in a stream, and some's got, you know, these big bass boats with outboard motors. You know, when I think of fishing, I think of tackle boxes and reels and bobbers and sinkers and hooks and earthworms. And I have memories of summertime camping and quick Saturday morning trips out to a lake, or solo fishing in a pond by my great-grandpa Zoller's cabin in Canada. So when we hear that Jesus' first disciples were fishermen, we need to disconnect our understanding from these recreational views and tie it to the more commercial fishers of coastal towns in our modern day, because that's more like what these fellas were doing. Now the boats in this story are commercial fishing boats with large handmade nets used for catching schools of fish to sell in the market. Now in 1986, on the northwest side of the Sea of Galilee, archaeologists actually unearthed a 1st century fishing boat from this area, the same area that our story's in. This would have been the same kind of boat used in this story. And they found that it was 27 feet long, 7.5 feet wide, and about 4 feet tall. So it's roughly the size of like a medium-sized camper. It would have had a single mast for a sail and some oars for rowing. So these guys are not weekend warrior hobbyist fishermen. This is their career. But it's also not a very popular career, because the sea is not looked upon very fondly by these folks in this time, in this era. In their stories, the sea is a dangerous place. The narrative woven into their existence is that the sea is the personification of the spiritual forces at war with God. because the waters existed in the book of Genesis, creation account, and they were all chaos. But out of this chaos, God brings land, God brings order, God brings life, thus defeating the forces that desire to destroy God's creation. Many Psalms talk about God triumphing over the mighty waters or the sea monster Leviathan. And Jonah even travels to the place of the dead, which is believed to be at the bottom of the sea, and he does it through a whale. Moses traversed through the Red Sea, but on dry ground. And Noah survives the chaotic waters covering the earth. So much of these stories around the sea for these folks are akin to like our modern day ghost stories surrounding the abandoned house on the corner, or the uneasy feeling we get when walking through a graveyard at night, or this childhood concept of monsters under the bed or in the closet, or something along those lines. There's a posture movement that I took note of when I read through this passage, the first section of it. Jesus starts off by standing by the lake, and the people are crowding in, and Jesus heads for a boat to continue to teach. Now, this is not merely a practical, functional move to find some more space. He's actually making a theological statement. Jesus sits down in the boat to teach, just like a rabbi sitting down in the seat of Moses in the synagogue to speak with authority. So this movement from standing on land to sitting on water is more important than what Jesus said, because if you noticed, Luke did not include the teaching content of what Jesus said here in this story, only his actions. So it says that this action taken by Jesus is claiming authority over the unseen chaotic powers that we fear are about to rush in and destroy our life. Tragedy and suffering, economic hardship, political insecurity, relational turmoil, the unknown and uncertain future, all of the things that we fear from childhood in the dark, but now grown up with more sophisticated names, are all enveloped in the love and power of God. We may still undergo these tragedies, but we are carried through them. We just don't sink. Now, as a teenager, I was a line cook at a 4-star restaurant called Mountain Jack's. It was a very fast-paced and stressful environment to work in. You know, you had to receive orders and cook it perfectly and plate it artistically and then get them out in a timely manner. And that was a challenge. So when closing time was upon us, we always held our breath. We tried to clean up and close down the line as much as possible during the operating hours, so we're ahead of the game when we closed and could possibly get home early. But will we get last minute walk-ins that cause us to re-dirty all the things we clean and set back up all the things that we had set down and make our departure time farther away? Sometimes we did, and we all hated it. So something similar happens in today's text. Simon, who is Peter, has been out all night fishing, and he's ready to go home. He's washing his nets, and Jesus asks him to head back out one more time. Now, the two nets commonly used by fishermen of this era were drag nets and trammel nets. Drag nets were long wall-like nets that were weighted at the bottom and buoyant at the top, and they made a wall of net, hence wall nets. And they were pulled through the water toward the shore, and then they were pulled ashore by hand from a bunch of team members, and then they go through the fish. Now, trammel nets were 3-layered nets, and they kept getting smaller openings as further the fish went in. It was weighted at the bottom and buoyant at the top as well. And these were used at night so the fish couldn't see the denser netting on the inside. And they would lower these nets into the water with the help of a partner boat and would drag the net through the water and then raise them back in the boat. And the fish would be all tangled in the very fine meshing on the very inside. Now, since our story's fishermen were out at night, it's most likely this kind of net and technique that they were using. So they're back from a fruitless night's work, cleaning, mending, untangling their nets, and they're tired and they're ready to go home. So when Jesus asked Simon, who will be renamed Peter eventually, to go out in broad daylight and let down his trammel net, I think it's a miracle that they even agreed to try. Because not only are they exhausted, but these nets are not daytime nets. It would be an utter waste of time. And they will have to start cleaning and mending and untangling their nets all over again and put their getting home time way farther away. But something happens. They caught such a large number of fish that it started breaking their nets and sinking their boats as they're trying to get it in. It mentions that they call for the second boat, and then that starts sinking with the weight of the fish. So me, being a nerd, asked the question, how much fish does it take to sink a boat of this size? And I found a theologian mathematician who did all the maths for us. And each boat could bear up to roughly 32,000 pounds of weight. Subtract the weight of the people and the gear, and you have roughly 31,500 pounds of fish per boat. Now, how much is that worth? For a skilled tradesman, this was equivalent to 15 years' wages. Simon's response to this miracle is, "Go away from me, Lord, I am a sinful man." Now, we might think of this as a derogatory phrase from Peter's mouth towards himself. Certainly, this emotion accompanying this would probably feel that way. But do we know of any other characters who have uttered similar things? Well, the prophet Isaiah said, "Woe unto me, I am a man of unclean lips." So while he feels the weight of the mistake of not taking Christ serious enough to call the second boat in advance and fish properly, the narrator uses this to elevate Peter to the same status as the great prophet Isaiah, showing us that Peter has a greater trajectory for us. So how does this all close out? Now, Peter's lack of faith is not an absence of faith. He actually does what Jesus said to do, although he did it without believing anything was going to come of it. He didn't call the second boat to go with him and do it properly. But a little action is all Jesus wanted to see. It's also all he's going to get from these guys for the rest of the story until the book of Acts Pentecost moment. His small action mixed with a little faith was enough for Jesus to say the next phrase, "Don't be afraid, from now on you will fish for people." Now, this phrase was enough for them to leave everything and follow him. Now, everything. Let's not forget that these guys just cashed in on the biggest catch of their lives. 15 years' wages for each individual fisher in fish. I'm sure the left everything includes this large catch. So what is it about this phrase that is so impelling that they do this action? It's not a phrase that Jesus just makes up on the spot for a good teaching moment. It actually has its roots in the prophet Jeremiah, chapter 16. 500 to 600 years before this moment with Jesus takes place, Jeremiah wrote about how the ethnic race of the Hebrew people were living in exile under foreign rule. Now, the people were scattered about and longed to return home. Jeremiah writes of a promise made when God says through him, "I will bring them back to the land which I gave their fathers. Look, I will send many fishermen, says the Lord, to catch them." So Simon Peter has actually just been invited in to participate in a promise 6 centuries in the making. And this promise entails bringing all the people back home into unity, back home again. But there's a catch, no pun intended. I didn't yet quote the whole section. When Jesus asked Peter to go and fish in the depths, there is a reference to this is the reference to the Jeremiah passage for sure, but I think that Peter will have to dive into the depths of his own person as well. He will have to go into the dark places of his own prejudices, hatreds, addiction, fears, and insecurities. Because this passage goes on to say, "To you will the nations come from the ends of the earth." Now, the interpretation in Peter's day of this section was that the nations would come and bow down to the nation of Israel and become their servants. The book of Luke has been redefining this instead as the inclusion of the outsider, not the subjection of the outsider. And it's going to take Peter this entire book and the Pentecost moment and half the book of Acts to figure it out. And then the Apostle Paul is going to have to chastise him again in one of his epistles because he forgot about it. So this is a big deal. And Peter will be inviting people to return home, as Jeremiah said, but not to Jerusalem or to Israel or to the Promised Land for that matter. This invitation to come home is to help people return home to their truest self, to delve the depths of their own self, their darkness and light, and sort through everything until you find this solid rock foundation of your own inner truth that God has given you. Now, our benediction today is an invitation from Irish poet and philosopher John O'Donoghue. This invitation is to observe yourself, not from the complacent and overly familiar places of self-criticism, guilt, fear, or insecurity, but to observe yourself as a stranger with curiosity and compassion. And perhaps this journey home will open up with more pathways and possibilities than previously seen. Now, it's a really rich piece, so I invite you to quietly reflect upon John O'Donohue's piece. Blessings.
Good morning, this is Troy with a reading from John O'Donohue. People have difficulty awakening to their inner world, especially when their lives have become overly familiar. The first step in awakening to your inner life and to the depth and promise of your solitude would be to consider yourself for a little while as a stranger to your own deepest depths. To decide to view yourself as a complete stranger, someone who has just stepped ashore in your life, is a liberating exercise. This meditation helps to break the numbing stranglehold of complacency and familiarity. Gradually, you begin to sense the mystery and magic of yourself. You realize that you are not the helpless owner of a deadened life, but rather a temporary guest, gifted with blessings and possibilities you could neither invent nor earn.
Thank you so much for joining us online today. We hope this service has been a blessing to you.
What now? 1. Participate. If you would like to participate in our services, we welcome your readings with a simple phone recording. 2. Partner. If you would like to give financially to ensure the continuation of this online service, there is a link on the bottom of your screen. And 3. Subscribe. You may subscribe on YouTube or like our page on Facebook to stay updated with our online services.
We hope you have found some hope, help, and healing today. See you next week.
As Jesus being revealed to the Gentile world as As Jesus being revealed to the Gentile word. Do over. And from the same area. This would have been, this was found, it was, we're going to get it done. We're going to do this before my face freezes. The wind's going through my pants. It's cold. Ooh, that wind. Frigid. Dear Lord, it's cold. All right, last one. Can do this. Can do this.